Okay, today, talk a little bit about conducting security audits. What is an audit? What's an audit? You bank guys know what an audit is, right?
Checks and balances.
Tell what?
Like checks and balances.
Checks and balances. If you get audited by the IRS, what are they going to do? Make you prove that you have all the paperwork. Did you have the receipts for those deductions? If we do an audit in the IT world, what are we going to do? Verify everything's the way it's supposed to be. We're going to verify that James didn't break the rules and share his home directory with Will. We'll keep going back to that. It's a good example. Should he have been able to do that? Well, the way the permissions are set up, yes, he should, which says that, hey, maybe we should go back and look at the way the permissions are set up, because do we really want that in this environment? Do we want that circumstance to happen? And in a lot of businesses, do you want that circumstance to happen? Do you want people to be able to share documents that they're working on with somebody else who may or may not have a need to know that information? And need to know is a big deal. We talk about minimum authority, minimum permissions, and that's really what we want to do, give people the minimum amount of authority that they need to do their job. If IT gives them the minimum amount of authority, and then James decides that somebody needs something else, have we kind of shot our policies in the foot? And how do we know, how are we going to find out if things like that are happening? The only way is to audit to see what's going on. What kind of permissions? What are people actually doing? And in the Windows world, as you'll recall, you go in and configure auditing separate, and there are a number of different ways to configure auditing there. Whether people are getting into directories, log on, how many times do they try to log on? Is somebody trying to log on as the administrator 800 times in the last hour? Probably say, hey, somebody's trying to password guessing or a brute force attack of some sort against your network. So what's going on? And we'll talk about logs, and we've talked about logs. If you're not going to look at the logs, they really don't do you a whole lot of good. And that's one of the things that you do need to do, is go back and do logging. And for those of you who have had the Perl class, the scripting class, that was one of the primary motivators for that, and that's one of the things it really can be used for, is for log analysis, to go in and pull out of huge logs the specifics that you're looking for. Windows logs, obviously you can filter them in Windows itself, but if you're just looking at text files, and if you recall, that's what it really does. It looks for strings. What are we going to do with this thing? It is kind of handy for that. So the objectives: define privilege audits. Privilege, what can we do? And James had the privilege of, it still does because I don't think we've changed it, of sharing information to his home directory, as would all of you, because everybody has the same privilege. Is that a least privilege? A least privilege. What do you actually need to do in your home directory in order to do your job as student? Copy and refile. You need to be able to put documents in there, change the documents that are in there. It's a storage location that you can modify those things. So do you really need to be able to share that information? No. Can it be a big deal? Is it a big deal? Probably not, but could it be a big deal? Sure, somebody colludes to do something. And if we're in the business world, businesses have secrets, do they not? And you may be working on a project. I may be working on a project that Devin doesn't need to know about, but I've shared the storage location with him. Now he's got that information. He could take that information, do something else with it, and sell it to somebody or do whatever else. Another one of the things that say you may have a security problem is that your competitor releases the same product that you're getting ready to release in a different color.
Or a week ahead.
Hmm?
Or a week ahead.
Or a week ahead, yeah. Describe how usage audits can protect security. What are people actually getting to? So privilege audits are what we think somebody should be able to do, right? We give certain permissions. Usage audits are what they're actually doing, what they're actually looking at. Can you, if you're in a large organization, check every user every day? Obviously not. You need to set up some sort of a program to see what's going on with these things. Methodology for monitoring to detect security-related anomalies, and this is where we kind of get into the snorts of the world, security-related anomalies, packet analysis, and there are other tools, but what are we going to look at? What is an anomaly? What's normal? And to know if you have an anomaly, what's the first thing you've got to define? Baseline. What's normal? If you don't have a baseline, how do you know that something is abnormal if you don't know what normal is? What's processor utilization on your servers at certain times of the day? It's going to be higher, it's going to be lower, but it's probably going to all average out. What goes on with these things? Different monitoring tools, and there are a number of monitoring tools, some open source, some commercial. The open source typically are going to work just as well as the commercial ones once you've figured out how to configure them. And in my, I guess, limited experience, although I play with a lot of these things, the issue really with the open source tools is getting them set up the first time. Once you get them set up the first time, they work pretty well after that. Privilege auditing. Privilege can be considered a subject's access level over an object. What can you do? What is your privilege? Can you share the home directory? Can you make changes to the documents? Can you share permission? Can you change permissions in the documents? And if you look at the Windows permissions, security permissions, and you work up the level from read on up to full control, each of the layers on top of the one below it has all of the lower level permissions plus something that's added until you get up to the full control where you can actually do the sharing and change those things. Principle of least privilege is the one that normally you would want to apply in the security world. Do we want everybody running around in the company being administrators? Domain administrators? We certainly hope not. We want most people to be users who can do the job that they're hired to do. Do we want users to be able to install software on their computers? Now, I think there's a couple of issues there if you allow that. One, is the software legal? And two, and I think I probably shared this one here before, when you give them that permission, they can install other things like viruses. And we had a group, this is a rerun, I'm sure, but we had a group around here that absolutely positively had to be administrators on the local machine so that they could install these softwares for these courses to try the stuff out. Well, they install, like 2 or 3 different pieces of software that they legitimately needed, and then probably 30 or 40 viruses. How much trouble is it for the network administrator to go maybe once a week and install a piece of software somewhere? Probably not that big a deal, depending on what's going on. It sure takes a lot less time than it does to try to clean up all the viruses and malware that comes with all of those things. Privilege auditing, reviewing the subject's privileges over an object. What kind of authority? And that's kind of what we did when James tried this thing out with sharing his home directory, wasn't it? Did we do a privilege audit here? Because what I tell you, my presumption was that you probably shouldn't be able to do that based on 10-year-ago history. Did we kind of do an audit there? We see if it would or would not work. And that's what a privilege audit is, isn't it? Reviewing a subject's privileges over an object. So what are his privileges over an object? Well, he's got full control of that object, the object being his home directory. Should he have full control of that object? Theoretically, no. theoretically he should have modified permission to that. Requires the knowledge of privilege management, how privileges are assigned, and how to audit these security settings. So what do you want to do? What do you want to allow people to do? That says that you got to know about the operating system that you're using and how do you assign these privileges. And once you assign the privileges, how do you find out what they are? What's going on? Have we given somebody too much authority? Privilege management is just what we're going to give users and what we're not going to give users. What can they do? From experience, not necessarily in the IT world, but from experience in what you allow users to do, and I think the Air Force and Navy guys will say the same thing, is you got to start by being very restrictive. You can always loosen up. But if you start trying to take things away from people, they get upset. So what you got to do is start by being a pain, and then you can loosen the strings up a little bit. Start with being more restrictive probably than you really need to, and then have them come to you. What do you actually need? I need to do this because of whatever, and that gets into change management. What are we going to allow people to do? So privilege management, the process of assigning and revoking privileges to objects. How do you determine what somebody needs for real?
Job role. Business rules.
Business rules, job description. What should they be doing? Work. Playing games on the internet. No, that's not it. Roles of owners and custodians are generally well established. Where those roles fit into the organization often depends on how the organization is structured. And again, that's exactly what Chris was saying. What are the business rules? What are the business policies? What do we want to allow? What do we want to allow people to do? Privilege management can either be centralized or decentralized, and they're going to go into a discussion about this. And I will continue to say centralized management is really tough. It doesn't really allow for any flexibility at individual locations. And the thing that I think this book and the other book talks about is, let's say that you have a chain of fast food restaurants. If you had central management, you could get some economies of scale because by mustard in bulk and ketchup in bulk and all of those things. But you would define the rules, what time the restaurant opens, what the restaurant serves, would have no local options, which means that McDonald's wouldn't have a fish sandwich. That's how they got that. It was a local option kind of deal, and they had a contest on one Good Friday that the founder had like a bread sandwich. I don't know what it was, a lettuce sandwich or something else, and the other one was a fish sandwich. And if the fish sandwich outsold the other one, they were going to put it on the menu, and it did. But what can we have? If we here had centralized management, everything would be controlled from Virginia Beach. And let's say that you needed a password reset. Who would have to reset the password? Virginia Beach. How long do you think that would take? A while. A while being several minutes, 10, 15 minutes, because you got to get the information there instead of walking over to the NOC. You have to email somebody.
You don't have to get on the network. You can't do that.
Huh? Can't get on the network, can't do that, so you'd have to have somebody email for you, huh?
Then somebody's got to read the email.
Then somebody got to read the email. They're actually very good about that. They're kind of like Chris has. They have the magic phones like a lot of you guys do, that the emails automatically pop up for most of the IT people. So they are very responsive because they have the devices that allow them to be responsive. And Chris, you hear his buzzing all the time. He looks at them to see if something is critical or not. If it is, he'll go do it straight away. But centralized, decentralized, and what we're really going to generally wind up with is some sort of a hybrid organization where the headquarters make some rules and then they get applied at the location. I mean, the same thing would be with policies. who actually makes the policies. In our organization, the policies are done at the local sites. If we didn't do that, let's say that we wanted a particular application, or let's say we wanted Wireshark to be put on as a policy so that it could be installed by the students to do labs. We would then have to ask them to do that. They'd have to fit that into their schedules. Whereas if we wanted here, we can go ask somebody that knows how to do it, or we could do it as a project to learn how to do it, build the MSI file, and then once you get that built, it's really not that difficult to install the policy. So centralized or decentralized, what kind of privilege management are we going to have? Centralized, I think hopefully we've already done this. One unit is responsible for all aspects of assigning or revoking privileges. All custodians are part of that unit. And again, the custodian is the one who's responsible for a particular resource. What if we wanted somebody's privilege revoked? What do we have to do? Submit that email. How long is it going to take? You don't really know. What if we wanted somebody to be added to a group, to be given a privilege and is centralized? You've got to go to the central authority, and then it's got to go through whatever process that they've set up. So it can take some time to do that. Decentralized, totally decentralized, on the other hand, can also be an issue, because let's go back to our chain of restaurants. And we'll pick on McDonald's since they're pretty standard. But they do have some local options, and they do have some experimental things that they put on the menus. Well, what if you owned a McDonald's, you could serve whatever you want. Instead of doing hamburger, you decided to do chicken? Would that fit into the corporate structure, the corporate objective? Probably not. But decentralized for privilege management delegates the authority for assigning or revoking privileges more closely to the geographical location of the user. We have that here, don't we? Who gives permissions? Chris does. If you need to be an administrator on a local computer, who's going to do that for you? Who's going to give you the privilege? Chris is, the network administrator, is going to do that. You don't have to wait for Virginia Beach. You don't have to submit it to Virginia Beach. You've got to submit it here. What kind of change management? Who would manage those things? He would. The foundation, the existing access control model for hardware and software being used, and this again goes back to what is the corporate model. What are we going to use? What are we going to allow people to do? 4 models, mandatory access control. We kind of have a form of that, don't we? Mandatory access control, because to get onto the computers, first you got to get to the computers. And since you're a security class, everybody, who can get to the computers? Whoever's a student. How do we identify the students? ID badge. Discretionary access control, which is what James did, isn't it? That's discretionary access control. Discretionary access control means that you give permissions to somebody, your discretion. Right-click, share, right-click, add them into the NTFS permissions. Role-based access control, and again, if we had a fully defined directory structure or directory services, it would have a role object. And what we do is give permissions to the role. And as the users change in the role, or let's say maybe Director of Education. So we would have a role called Director of Education. Director of Education would give permissions to all the resources that they need. Mr. Geist decides to go back teaching. No, he's not going to do that. But he goes back to teaching. What we would do, we would take him out of that role and then hire Mr. Matthews as the Director of Education, put him in that role. He would have those permissions. Quit grinning. He would have the permissions to do the job. Since there's not a role object in Windows, you can effect the same process by just making a group. And we've talked about that. Probably reset passwords is a little more simple, because anybody here ever get locked out or forget your password? Never. Never. You guys are not nearly as bad as some other parts of the school, because I see that doesn't happen very often with you. Huh? But it does in some other parts of the school. You think Chris wants to stay here until 10:30 every night? Every night, including Fridays? And then come in on Saturday mornings just in case? Probably not. So what we do is delegate somebody a role to reset student passwords. Mr. Neuron, Mr. Parsons at night. I don't know if the night librarian has been delegated to that or not. But yes. What if Mr. Neuron got a different job? What would we do? Take him out, and then we put the new librarian in. So instead of going around and trying to figure out who's doing what, we have an object defined as a role. And we have some predefined roles in Windows, don't we? Like maybe backup operators, administrators. Are those predefined roles? They're all there. Print managers, I think. Is that one of them? So those roles are there. Rule-based access control. And we kind of did that in the Active Directory class, did we not? I know you haven't had that one, Devin. But did you make a rule to deny access to a specific application? Yeah. Would that be a rule-based access control? So we got mandatory, and they ask about mandatory, don't they? We'll pick on Adam again on the test. Probably mandatory and discretionary. I don't think they talk about a lot about role and rule. Maybe they do. Role. I'm pretty sure on the actual test it was mandatory. Was which? On the actual security like that. Was. The mandatory. Yeah. Mandatory, so each of those things. Mandatory used to be something that was kind of associated with military and government, that you had to actually get into a secure area to be able to use the resource, and that was the mandatory access. That you had to have, the fancy badge with all the right colored stripes on it to get into some location. Auditing involves a regular review of user access rights, using group policies, implementing storage and retention policies. Storage and retention policies are things that we don't really talk about a lot, but how are we going to store it? How long are we going to keep it? How long are you required to keep it? In the medical world and in the banking world, those requirements are going to be more stringent than, let's say at Skyline College. How long are we going to keep stuff? How long are we going to keep the information in your home directory after you leave?
6 months.
6 months? Why?
Not long.
Not long, actually, until he remembers to delete it, to delete the directory. Once you start running out of storage space, a lot of those things become like, do I really need this in here anymore?
How long do we get out email?
I don't know. I think email is a whole separate management program. It was my understanding that those weren't supposed to go away, but I don't know if that's the case or not.
Well,
your email is run by Microsoft, not by Skyline or ECPI. When they went to that thing, when you got the SkyDrive and all that stuff, the big switch over, for those of you here, when we did the switch over, that actually is at Microsoft. A lot of colleges have done that. University of Virginia, I know, did. You had a choice of whether you went to a Gmail account or whether you went to the Microsoft account. They let you pick. And then if you didn't pick, they gave you a default, and I forgot which one it was. Sorry?
A lot of schools like to keep your email.
Yes, and it's a good idea. Although we don't beg for money. Most of the schools I went to always beg for money. They always want your email address and your phone number so they can call you and say, would you like to contribute to our fund so that these students can stay in school? But yes, and to stay in touch with people. We like to stay in touch because we want to know what we need to change in the curriculum, what was useful, what wasn't useful to you, what would be more useful to you. And we really do want to know those things. User access and rights review. And what rights here is a little bit different than the Microsoft definition of rights. Remember, the Microsoft definition of rights is what you can do to the desktop. Permissions are your ability to use resources. Rights here means both of them, what you can do to the resource and what you can do to the desktops themselves. If you use NetWare, NetWare uses the term rights for what Microsoft defines as permissions. Written policy that mandates regular reviews of these things. User rights, periodic review, user access, privileges, and rights. What can users do? We need to audit those things to see if that in fact is what's happening, and this is just one of those documents, and that one is in your book. Reviewing user access rights for logging into the network can be performed on the network server. What kind of policies have we restricted you to particular times of day? And we haven't you, and we probably don't need to do you, but are there circumstances when you would want to do that? We'll pick on Chris in the bank. I don't know if they do, but might they want to restrict the time of day that people can log onto the computers, so that you don't get somebody coming in on the weekend and logging in and covering up his $4 billion worth of false trades, like it happened, I guess, to Societe Generale, a French trader who wasn't really, just faked it. I think he lost about $4 billion for the company. And whose fault was it? It's the network administrators, because they weren't following their policy. He shouldn't have been there on weekends. He shouldn't have been able to log on to do the work to cover up the trades. We're hopefully not going to be in a situation like that, and that's an extreme, but when do you want users to be able to be on? Are there times of the day, particular days of the week that you don't want users on, or particular sets of users shouldn't be able to get into the network? Time restrictions, those kinds of things. Permissions over objects can be viewed on the network server. And I don't think they talk about it in here, but in the sysinternals toolkit is a little executable that will go through your entire directory structure and tell you who has permissions to what folders. It's not the prettiest display in the world, but it will help you in that audit. Who can do what? What users can't, what do users have permissions to? This is just a listing of, if you've done any of the Microsoft courses, or if you've looked at the permissions, the Microsoft permissions, NTFS permissions and share permissions, and as you recall, those of you who have had those courses, two different things. The share permissions basically allow the resource to be seen on the network. The NTFS permission is the local permission and the remote permission. This is only remote. Share permissions are only effective when you go across the network. When you share them, if you're in more than one group and you have different permissions, individually you get the most permissive, but when we access something across the network, we get the most restrictive of the two themselves. If you sit down and log on to a computer, the share permissions are meaningless because they only take effect when you access a resource across the network, across the wire. Group policies. Instead of setting the same configuration baseline on each computer, a security template can be created so that if we had a security policy that we wanted to apply to, well, let's just say the computer's a local one that we wanted to apply to these computers in this room. If they were not in a domain environment, we could do one of two things, couldn't we? We could have James go around, sit down at each computer and log on and set that policy. Or we could have James sit down at each computer and import a template that we created that had the standard policy that we wanted to use. What would be the easier thing to do? Do it active, join them to a domain and give a group policy and put that policy on all the computers in the domain. Do all the computers in this building get the same security policy?
Yes.
Really? Thank you. Yes. Okay, so Adam doesn't have to go back and repeat Active Directory. Everybody else does. How many security policies do you have in a domain? One. So do all the computers have the same security policy? They don't all have the same group policy. I agree with that. Maybe that's what you were thinking about. The security policy, passwords, how long can you keep them, how long they have to be, those sorts of things, account lockout policy, that's all part of the security policy, and you can only have one of those. Until you get to Windows Server 2008, and then you can have more than one. A couple of little changes in those things, but instead we're going to use a group policy, and a group policy allows us to do the same things that we can do when we sit down at a computer. We can just do it to more machines at the same time. Can we really do anything more in the security world with a group policy than you can do if you sat down at the computer? So we have one security policy. Instead of doing it on 150 computers individually, we can do it to all of the computers collectively by using the group policy out of Active Directory. Can we have different policies? Absolutely. Other policies like which applications do you see? What are your background? Those kinds of things can all be different. What we want to do with those proxy settings, on and on and on and on. Security template, configure the suite of baseline security settings, and we can create our own. And if you'll think back again to the Windows classes, there was the security analysis tool that had some baselines for different types of servers and workstations defined that you could use their template. You can create your own template, whatever you want to do. If you're a network administrator and you want all of the computers, centralized management, we want them all to have the same template, what we can do is create a template and then send it to our individual network administrator. Say, here, put this on your computers, here, import this into Active Directory, so that they all have the same combination. But if the network administrators have any idea what they're doing, you can just tell them what you want set in that thing, couldn't you, instead of doing the templates. The templates are really to send to locations where you kind of got somebody there that's doing what you tell them to do, and they just import the template instead of trying to set those things. That happens in a lot of small businesses, doesn't it? Who's the network administrator in a small business typically? Everybody, or if you have one, it's whoever could log onto the computer when they walk through the door, something like that. Whoever knows the most. Group policy objects, Active Directory, we've talked about that. Most of you have had the experience in doing those things. Within a group policies, known as a group policy object, so the things that we set in there are the group policy objects. If we want to install an application, if we want to make a blue background on the computers, if we want to change how often passwords need to be reset from the 180 days to, let's say, 30 days. Oh, you'd really love that, wouldn't you? Beats the 12 or 14 days, I think, well, we had to set it last place I was because of the things we're doing. Manipulated using the administrative template files are included within the group policy object. These administrative files are on the local computers and they're on the domain controllers. So they are the same templates that we use. Storage and retention policies, information lifecycle management. This is something that the company's got to make a decision as how long are we going to keep things. How long do you keep logs? Log retention policy, that's going to be one of the ones that's here, storage and retention policies. How long should you keep logs? 5 months. 5 months. How long did it take TJ X years? As long as you have the system. There's probably a point that becomes too long, but yeah, it's more than 5 months, probably somewhere between 2 and 5 years. Unless your company gets sued. How long you have to keep emails if you're in a lawsuit until the lawsuit's resolved. You're not allowed to destroy anything, which also means that you can't reuse tapes. You need to have a policy in place before anything like that happen. But typically, ILM strategies, typically according to the storage and retention policies, these are, again, part of the policies. When you start looking at policies, go look at SANS.org. Again, they got a lot of good templates to guide you through these things. Data classification, how sensitive is the information? If we're at Apple and we're working on a super secret new iPad, probably going to be pretty highly sensitive. How sensitive is the information? Who can have that information? How do you isolate these things? And these are just classifications, again, table that's in the book. The military uses a level unclassified, confidential, secret, top secret. Did I get them all? And in the top secret world, they have some sub-classifications. Grouping data into categories often requires assistance of users who save and retrieve the data on a regular basis. How sensitive is this? How do you decide how sensitive information is? That's something that's going to have to be defined by the company itself. Different tiers of storage and accessibility. Once we define something as sensitive, who can get to it? And that goes back to the privilege assignment. Who can actually get to this information? Usage auditing. We had the privilege information and all those other things, and we have all these rules, and we do the audits, and we say, oh, yeah, we've got this thing under control. Usage audit, when you go in and look and say, who's actually getting there? And we go look and say, why is Will in James's home directory? That's not supposed to be. Or, how come Chris has been changing the payroll? He's not supposed to be there. Who's actually doing these things? In order for that to happen, you would have to have made some decisions on what you're going to audit before these things. What object a user has actually accessed, the examination of which subjects are accessing specific objects and how frequently. And we can do a lot of that with our audit configuration in Windows. What are we going to audit? Who are we going to audit for? Who's actually accessing a resource? When you do these things, a couple of things to think about. Some of them is you want to know who actually did make a change. Some of them you want to know who actually tried to make a change. So everybody got a 20% pay raise. What do we want to know? Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. What happened? What happened to the system? Well, we find out that Adam, who was supposed to be there, went in and he actually made the change. You go talk to him and say, oh, yeah, I punched the wrong key. I forgot to put a decimal point in. It's supposed to be a 2%. Everybody got a 20% or whatever else. My bad, yeah. My bad. And it's going to come out of your pay. Sometimes access privilege can be complex. Auditing can help reveal incorrect permissions. Are you going to get the permissions right every time? Let me tell you, no. One of the things to do, this is me, when you do these things, try them out with a user that you think you've made these changes for to see if they work. Because if you use your user, particularly an administrative user, about everything works for an administrator. And then you do all this stuff, you try it out, and, oh yeah, it's just great, it's just great, it's just great, and then you make the changes in the company and everybody comes in on a Monday morning and nobody can do their job. Try it out as a regular user before you say, yeah, let's move on. When we do the things for the students, when we try to do these things, we try it as a student account to see if it actually works. Is that always successful? No, but it gives us a pretty good indication of whether it's going to work or not work. Inheritance, and in the permissions world, and in the access rights world, and in the Active Directory world, policies world, these things are inherited. They're inherited down the tree unless you block inheritance. In the permissions world, if you don't want a permission to be inherited, you can stop that. That comes back to, in some manner, how you set up your directory structure. Because if I share a directory, what's going to happen to all the files and subdirectories under that directory? They inherit those permissions. They've just been shared. All you got to do is go to share and work your way down. What if you didn't want that to inherit? In Windows, you go into the Advanced and turn off inheritance. You don't have to inherit the permissions, but by default, permissions are inherited. That's one of the things that you can wind up giving permissions where you really didn't intend for them to do, and that goes back to planning before we actually put the stuff in, planning the directory structure. How are we going to set this thing up so that inheritance works for us? Active Directory the same way. How are we going to set it up so that inheritance works for us and not against us? Folder A, full control, inherits full control right down the line. So each of these files in these folders would inherit the same permission of the folder itself. Can we turn it off? Absolutely. If we don't want it inherited into folder B, we can go into folder B and turn off inheritance in the advanced. And if you will recall, as a reminder back to Windows, you can't change inherited permissions. You can't take them away. You have to turn off inheritance before you can do that. Indication is they're grayed out. If they're grayed out, they're inherited, and you can't change them. You've got to go turn inheritance off. You can give explicit permissions, the same explicit permissions, because when you turn it off, the options are to not do any, no permissions, or to copy the existing permissions. If you copy the existing permissions, they become explicit. They're then inherited to everything underneath it. So if we blocked inheritance at folder B and copied the permissions and made changes, the permissions from folder B would be inherited into folder C. The A permissions would be inherited by the files that are in the A folder. We blocked inheritance here, so we set a new set of permissions at folder B, and they would be inherited from that point on down. Group policy inheritance, the base security policy that applies to all users in the Microsoft Active Directory domain. And go back again, more review, except for the security policy. We have one security policy. But if we set a policy, we can block inheritance in the domains just like we can block inheritance in the directory structure. And if we don't want the person that's been assigned as the custodian of that to be able to block the policies, we as the administrator can mark that policy as a no override so that it can't be blocked. Ready to keep going? See if we actually can do this thing. Restart. Pause. Okay, I was recording all that. I guess I have to go back and take that part out. Okay, so usage auditing, where we want to see what people actually are doing. Log is a place where we start those things. And there are a number of log tools available to you that you can use. Perl would be one of those things that you could use. I've told you the story about Snort and Acid, right? Acid was actually the log analysis tool that went with Snort. And there were a couple of tech guys back in the back when we were in the office in the back talking about Snort and Acid, and there was a math instructor back there saying, "What are you people doing?" So when you get into the open source community, they name some of these things strangely. Logs, obviously log entries, and they will be sequential. What you have to do is to be able to get the information out that you need, which is sometimes easy, sometimes not so easy. I know this is probably a repeat too, but Roger Farmer, the former network administrator, was going to print off some firewall logs for a class one time until he found out it was like 200 pages for one day. Or more, it may have been bigger than that, but it was a huge, lot more than he wanted to print. How do you go through that amount of information? You've got to have some sort of an analysis tool to help you with it. Windows will allow you to filter, and you can reorder the things or order the things in it. It has some analysis ability along with it. Can be used for troubleshooting problems. Am I the only one that when all else fails, I'll look at the log? Anybody else do that? I mean, I try and try and try. Oh, it don't work. And then finally look at the log and say, oh, the log tells me exactly what I need to do. So you may want to do those things too. That's my last resort kind of thing. Log management, generating, transmitting, storing, analyzing, and disposing of security log data. How long are you going to keep them? This is all should be part of the policies that the company has. how you're gonna do the analysis, and you probably look at several tools, but there are tools out there that will help you do the log analysis. Windows tries to help. Usage auditing, security application logs, antivirus software, remote access software, and automated patch update software. Antivirus software is something that you probably do want to have reported to you. And centralized antivirus management, you'll get all this information coming back to the central management about the computers that have viruses, what the virus is. Some things you can do remotely. Most things you can't do remotely. You got to actually go to the machine. One of the things that happens to us quite a bit, since we now have hopefully the proper configuration of Internet Explorer so that it deletes the temp files when you close the browser, which, by the way, you should turn on. It's not I don't think it's the default yet. You need to turn that on at home because these temp files that may be infected to get downloaded get deleted when you close the browser. So he actually winds up going to a lot of computers and saying that the software reports as infected, and you go and run it, there's nothing there because it got deleted when the temp files got deleted. A number of things like that can help. Remote access software, who is actually accessing remotely, and if you not have any remote access, not a big deal. Automated patch update service, we would call this WSUS. There are other ones out there. I think that one of the earlier chapters had this case box. That's one of the things that you can do with it is manage updates. And which one was it that would check the updates? Actually, both of those scanners would check the updates. But well, both of them will. Who's the other one? Not Nessa's, the other one? GLAN. LandGuard, yeah. LandGuard, if you have the proper authority and you configure it to use the correct password, will actually push updates out to machines that it finds as not secure. Got to have the right authority. If you're a domain, domain administrator authority, you can actually get on the machines. You can push them out that way. You can check them and have it update the machines. So there are lots of things out there that will do that. Security hardware logs, network intrusion detection systems, host and network intrusion prevention systems. Network intrusion detection system simply detects what's going on and logs it. It may send you a message. Now, having said that, depending on how it's configured, you can configure an IDS as an active IDS so that it may take some actions once it finds something that doesn't match up, something different from standard. An intrusion prevention system is in fact supposed to prevent intrusions into the network. An intrusion prevention system has to be in line. The new Cisco routers typically will have the ability to be intrusion prevention systems. They have definition files that can be upgraded regularly, and boy, the router's certainly in line with all the traffic in it. So it checks the traffic as it goes across the router using the intrusion prevention system of it. It has to be installed separately, but it is available in many cases. Other things, DNS. DNS lookups, and you've heard me talk about using OpenDNS, and I continue to recommend that you use that at home. But we can go look and see if we have some really odd numbers of lookups. We found an infected machine because it got like, I don't know, something like 1,500 DNS lookups in about a 4-hour period. That's a lot of lookups. So now you got to start tracking it back. But DNS, what's going on there, can help you out too. How do I know that Facebook is the number 2 site in this building? When I go to OpenDNS, how many hits do I get on a 24-hour period? How many over the course of a week? What's the number one? Google? Which is kind of a good thing. I think if everybody's going to Google to find out how to get to Facebook, I don't know. But authentication servers, who's actually using these things? And proxy servers, some people don't really understand about a proxy server is it logs all of that stuff. That came in handy one day when somebody sent an email to the director 4 directors ago threatening him. He really wasn't threatening him, but he didn't realize that what he had done was a threat. So what we do? Go to the proxy server and go back to the computer, and he was still at the computer. That user was there. I didn't really mean it that way, but you can do a lot of tracking back with that. And I've told you the story before. When my son was a teenager, teenage boys really have these bad habits on the internet. Instead of sitting and watching everything he did, I ran through a proxy server. He didn't like it. I could see every place he'd been. I could block sites. Oh, that wasn't me. That was my friend. Okay, but it's blocked now. Can you block every bad site? No. OpenDNS will help you a lot because it has categories, and they have lots of people working on that. We didn't have that then. Have lots of people working on those things. So,
Block every bad site
if you knew what they all were, but guess what? What happens when somebody puts up a new one today?
Same day attack.
Same day attack.
0
0-day attack, right? But now you've got to get it into your list.
It's the same thing with parental controls, like
Parental
all the
control.
X-rated sites, they're not rated as X-rated.
They're not rated as X-rated, and all of those ratings are all voluntary, but can you keep a track of all of those things? It's really difficult. That again, where OpenDNS helps out a lot because it has lots of, it's a working group. It has a lot of people working on these things. Do you want to necessarily block everything? No. But probably things like hate speech. You don't really need hate speech in your company. You don't need pornography maybe, and they have those. You certainly don't need adware and spyware, and they have a category for that. So there are lots of categories, or you can go into it and individually permit or block sites. And we've had to do that thing. You always have to tweak these things because they come and they go, and you can report it as a misconfigured. This site really shouldn't be in there. There was some, when it first came out, some Linux forums that were blocked for whatever reason. We had to accept them and then report them as this probably is miscategorized. Can you move it someplace because it really is a discussion forum that we really need to get to. If it remains miscategorized, you can go in and make specific, explicit exceptions to both permits and denies on these things. So it's not like you're tied into the categories. Once you get the categories, you can make the changes. Firewalls, who's trying to attack you? What are the scans, particularly on the firewall, and firewall logs, what comes in and goes through the firewall, depending on how much logging you want to do. You have lots of granularity in how much you want to log on the firewalls themselves. This is the Symantec antivirus, just what you're going to get into that to configure the histories and on down. Each of the antiviruses have their own things. I kind of like the one that Avast put up, quite honestly, so you can see what's going on. It actually monitors some traffic and how many hits, those kinds of things. I thought that was pretty good for a piece of free software. Usage auditing, again, table in your book, just the type of information, notification messages, dynamic updates, and on down. Number of full packets sent by the server, how much do you want to do, DNS, detailed log data. How much do you want to log? How much information do you want? In a lot of cases, you're going to have a lot of flexibility in how much information you actually get. And you may want to just see the kind of the summary logs until you see something that's, oh yeah, I need to look at this further, and then do more logging based on that so that you're not looking at 8,000 pages worth of logs a day. And you easily could do that even in a small network if you logged everything. Outgoing log table, this says it's a firewall log, so LAN IP 192.168.1.36, LAN IP 10.60.211. something computer in this room had a destination URL, destination IP, destination whatever of this address, and then the service port, what protocol was it using, HTTPS, POP3, SMTP, whatever else. What service were we using? This service port number over here can be kind of handy if we have infected machines, couldn't it? Because many of these Trojans, viruses, softwares like the Sub7 that we used operate on a specific port. I think, what was it, 27734 is 277 something or another that you could see. You would be able to see that in your log. So if you were looking for those kinds of things, then you use your software to assist you in your log analysis to look for those specific port numbers.
Oh, the first one's Western Kentucky University.
Oh, you're looking them up? Yeah, I don't remember where this author is from, but that you find is a lot of those things. IP addresses, types of things, IP addresses being rejected and dropped, probes to ports that have no application services running on them, probes, the things that we're doing, port scanning, that's what we're talking about, is probes trying to find something that's open. Source routed packets. Source routed packets are packets that come from the outside to the inside, from the outside that have the IP address of your internal network. You don't want those in. That's somebody trying to compromise your internal network.
So when we run Nmap, there's a log of that? It logs it?
Well, if you have it set up, if you are scanning a firewall and you have the firewall log set up to log that type of information, absolutely. I know James has talked about his firewall log that grows exponentially as people are trying to usually find a port 21. That seems to be the more popular one.
Unless they, like that one, he just kept it the same IP address,
Same
port.
Expected to change. Well, probably somebody didn't know how to scan, huh?
Well, it just kept, I mean, it was like every 30 seconds.
Yeah. And you talked about Nmap. There are a lot of different tools. Nessus does that.
Like that one you done.
Nmap does that.
Like that one you done for the lab where you stealth network
Yeah.
shields up.
Yeah.
It'll actually show them a firewall log every single port scan that is done. And then it'll just know itself.
Yeah. What do you want to do? What can you do about those things then? Could block that IP address, can we?
Then it changes it.
Hmm?
Then it can change it.
Then you can change it, sure. He could, but somebody that's probably scanning the same port, same IP, on and on and on and on, and probably is stuck in scan or something or another. Because what's the objective of the scans? Our objective was to find weaknesses in our own network. But trying to find a port that's open that has a vulnerability and then something that they can compromise that port with. That's what port scan is all about. How do you recognize a port scan? Well, you can look at those things. If it goes sequentially, and they don't usually go sequentially, they'll jump around, but a lot of different attempts to connect to you from the same IP address on different ports, they're doing a port scan. They're trying to find some way into your network. So FTP is a very popular one because what are they looking for? Looking for anonymous FTP sites to allow them to store stuff. A lot of people are just looking to store movies or torrent things that they don't want to be responsible for if they get caught. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want to put child pornography on your computer, would you? We'll put it on Chris's instead. Then who goes to jail? Chris. So, I mean, these things, and I come up with some kind of silly analogy sometimes, but some of the things you need to think about. What are people trying to do? Check your own machines every once in a while, particularly when you're in a network. Check your servers. Oh, golly, I didn't know. Where'd all that disk space go? You ever said that? Where'd all that disk space go? Hmm? Could be a virus replication. Could be somebody's found a way to store their stuff on your machine. Is it always an issue? No, I know of an organization that will go nameless that was updating some stuff from A user at home, remote desktop, made an FTP connection. Unfortunately, made an anonymous FTP connection. I have no idea why they did that. To allow the user to upload the brand new web page. They uploaded the brand new web page, and everybody forgot about the brand new anonymous FTP connection. And then somebody else was watching the network, and around midnight, you're talking like 80-90% bandwidth utilization? Probably not. What happened? Some guy from Germany was storing his movie there. It wasn't a pornographic movie. It was a movie so that, you know, here, all your friends of mine, go get this movie. It's here. But what's going to happen? What can happen? What's normal? What's not normal? 80% bandwidth utilization for long periods of time at 2 o'clock in the morning, probably not real normal for most networks. If you're Netflix, it might be. Other things you're going to look for, source right of pocket, suspicious outbound connections. And this goes back to what ports are you connected to outbound. And many of these devices that open up the firewall, and that's what they're really doing is open up the firewall, have standard ports that they work on. And then unsuccessful logins. If somebody has tried to log into your administrator account, 800 times in the last 30 minutes, probably somebody trying to do a brute force or password guessing sort of an attack on the machine itself, on the network. Usage auditing, and as you can see, these things can be, I think, daunting. What are you looking for? Well, this is where you get into the analysis, the log analysis. What are we looking for? You can kind of look at these things. Parent, child, all these are parents. We get down here. What do we got? IMAP, DNS, FTP work on down and down and down and down and down. The time, and these things all have about the same time, and then we get down here, one is 36.5. This would be in seconds. So this would be all at 0.02.03.02, 2/100ths of a second in time. So you're going to see a lot of traffic, and if you're logging everything, you're going to see a huge amount of traffic. This has got categories here that you can go in and look by category at what your traffic is, and you can specify categories. Events and occurrence within a software system that's communicated to users or other programs outside the operating system. System events that are performed by the operating system itself. So an event is an occurrence, something happened, and a system event is something that was performed by the system itself. Other events would be performed by the users. System events, client requests, the server responds, and then we get some usage information in these things. Logs are based on the audit records, and in most cases, you're going to specify how much you want logged. If you go into audit, think back to auditing in Windows. What do you want to audit? Do you want to audit everything? Log on successes, failures, or successes and failures. Objects, usage, when you go to a particular folder. What do you want to audit? Who do you want to audit it for? If you want to fill up a log really, really quickly, go audit system events. It'll drive you absolutely out of your mind. Other logs are available. You can go in and look at your HTTP logs. Who's getting on your web server? What are people doing on the web server? Are they trying to get to other places on the web server? I've looked at the logs on Ranger occasionally, and somebody actually a couple years ago was trying to get in. I have no idea why, but somebody was, you could see that same IP address, same pattern, trying to log into the system. Somebody that didn't have a username and password. I guess they thought there was something magic there, but there really wasn't anything magic there. Logs can tell you a lot about what's going on your system. Account information, operational information, and you've looked at those. This looks to me like, yeah, this is the new format that you're going to see the logs in Windows 7, the Server 2008. Security, audit success, all these are successful logons. Log on, special log on down the line. Audit success, you can look in here and see who logged on successfully. If we had audit failures, it would say audit failure, and you can group these things based on audit successes and audit failures. The failures may be what you're interested in, successes may be what you're interested in. Routine review, help identify security incidents, policy violations, fraudulent activity, and operational problems shortly after they occur. But you've got to review the logs. If you don't review the logs, then why have them? Great historical records, right? Look back in 3 years and say, oh, yeah, you know, somebody's been stealing credit cards for 18 months. You think they were looking at their logs?
No.
For real? Probably not. Or if they were, they may not have known what they were looking for or had policies configured poorly. Usage, periodic audits. What are people actually using? We've talked about we can set up what we want users to have. Does that always work? One of the ways to try that out is log on as a user that has that authority. Put them in that group. See what happens. Did you get the results that you expect? A lot of people love to set things up, and I see it all the time, love to set things up and then walk away without trying it out. Save yourself an awful lot of heartburn if you try it out. Because if you try it out and it doesn't work, you can probably fix it before it becomes a real crisis. And you do want to avoid crises. Log aggregators, where we can put logs together. What this is really talking about here is use something to help you do the log analysis with. Prioritize management throughout the organization. The aggregators provide adequate support. We've got the tools and the people that we need in order to do the analysis. Change management, methodology for making changes and keeping track of those changes, often manually. Change management, what are we changing on the servers? What are we changing on the workstations? What are we changing in the policies? And what this really means is as we make changes, keep track of it. Write it down. We've gone through that, and I just kind of try to get you in the habit of doing these things sometimes in one of the Windows classes. Keep track of what you did to your server. Did somebody feel really good about the things that they logged, what they did to their server? I'm terrible about that. Changes that I make, oh yeah, I'll remember that. And you probably will for several months. And then you run into situations like we do now is, oh, you know, we had that problem about 3 years ago. I don't remember what we did about it. Yes, you've experienced it before, and now you're experiencing it again, but since you didn't write it down, you don't have a clue what you did to solve it. Save yourself a lot of problems, a lot of time if you write those things down and what you did to solve those problems, because they tend to come back. We really have gone through, oh yeah, that happened about 2 years ago. I don't remember what we did. Does anybody else? Any change in the system architecture, data classification. I think any changes that you make, particularly on a server, should be annotated. Because one of the things that you wind up with, and this goes someplace else, but we're talking about a Cisco router. Some things change when you reboot routers. Some things don't change until you reboot a router. I was doing this course and said that they had this contest to find out when was the longest a router had been running, and somebody reported one had been running like 4.5 years without being rebooted. So you make a change, and you forget about that change, and 4.5 years later you reboot your router, and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. You're going to remember what you did 4.5 years ago?
I wonder if it could run for 4.5 years.
Huh?
I wonder if it could go that long.
Oh, yeah, they go a long time. They had at the University of North Carolina, they lost a server, and it ran for 2 years. It was still running, it was working, they just couldn't physically find it. They were doing some remodeling, and somebody walled it into a closet. It was running the whole time, doing its job. They were getting into it. It was a file server. It was a NetWare 312 file server. This was a lot of years ago. But yeah, doing its job. So yeah, these things can run for a long time. Router, heck, I don't remember. Do you know when the last time we rebooted our router was? When the power went off. didn't have any choice, that's right. It said, no, I'm going to come back on. Data classification. Change management team, and this is in a larger organization. Are the changes necessary? What do people want to change? And change management also goes back to the things that we talked about with the people that absolutely positively have to be the local administrators. Those things should all be part of change management. Upgrades to the system should be part of change management. Things that you install on the computer should be part of change management. You need to have a process. We're a small organization. If somebody wants something done, they'll go talk to Chris. I need that done. In a large organization, you're probably going to have to submit the request, and it'll have to be analyzed. What's the impact on security? What's the good and the bad? What's the upside and the downside? And security, hopefully, a little bit paranoid by now, but security is balancing usability with keeping something secure. Can you keep it absolutely secure? Not really. You can make it pretty secure by making it very unusable. Turn the computer off, it's fairly secure. But if somebody steals it, then they can get all your information. What the team, and this is just what may be, who might be on the team, the makeup would be a function of the company itself. IT, servers, network enterprises, security, and upper-level management. Upper-level management, yes, we absolutely need this. Do we really need this? Is it worth the risk? And the upper-level management people are there so that you can make them aware of the risk. Back to TJ Maxx, we're not going to upgrade our wireless access points. They took a risk. Took the wrong risk, but they took a risk. Change management team review proposed changes, ensure that the risk and impact of the plan is understood. What is the risk? And then the risk reward, does the reward supersede, override the risk in these things? Methodologies and tools, several instruments detect security-related anomalies, and anomaly-based monitoring, detecting statistical anomalies, and this goes back to have the baseline. If we don't have a baseline, how do we know that something is out of the ordinary, something that's an anomaly, something that's not part of what we expect to have? Significant deviation from this baseline, an alarm is raised. And that's what viruses do. They're looking, well, some virus checkers are looking for anomalies. It depends on which ones you are using. The advantages, they can detect anomalies quickly, and one of the disadvantages is they can detect anomalies that really aren't. A lot of false positives in these things where it's, oh yeah, something's bad going on here, and it may not be. It may be something that is different than the baseline, but it's really not anything that is damaging. Normal behavior can change quickly. Let's say around here, let's look at server utilization, files, getting files. Could that change when we started a new class? How many people are on the server at any given time? How much information is going? So did the baseline just change? Yeah, kind of. So normal is not normal forever. You've got to keep updating what normal is. Signature-based monitoring, which is what most virus checkers are, and is what many intrusion prevention detection systems are. The Cisco ones are signature-based. They define what is abnormal in a file, and these things actually look inside the data to see what's there. But the signature files are commonly used. You've got to have a database that keeps updating these things because, again, normal changes. Do people write new viruses? Do people write new malware? So you have to have new definitions constantly in these things. Signature-based got to be constantly updated. That's why we have to update our antivirus software every 32 minutes, right? Or whatever it is. I think ours set up to check for an update every 2 hours. Do viruses get written every 2 hours? They might. Sometimes more than that. Do they get put into the database? Many times it doesn't get new definitions, but a lot of times they do get new definitions. Behavior-based, more adaptive and proactive instead of reactive, uses the normal process and actions as a standard, continuously analyzes the behavior of processors and programs on the system alert you if it detects an abnormal action. Our normal action is that our processor utilization is 5% max. May bounce up to 5% or may bounce up to 100% for 2 minutes. Our processor utilization just went to 100% for 3 hours. That would probably be something out of the ordinary that we would want to check on. Not necessarily up-to-date signature files or compiled baseline statistical behavior. What are we going to do based on behavior? And this is methodologies for monitoring. This is part of the Windows thing. Insat.exe is trying to modify a protected file or directory. What would you like to do? Yes or no? Allow the request or block the request. And these are the things when you install an update. If you are not performing any of these operations, you may want to consider blocking the request. User access control in Windows, that's exactly what that's about. If it pops up and you didn't do anything, then you probably want to say no. Now, there are some things that pop up. This Java auto update asks me every single time, and I wish it'd just go away, but it won't. Monitoring tools, performance-based, accumulated under performance operational data is compared with the baseline data to determine how closely to the norm that we are. So we have a performance baseline and then the performance monitors, what goes on with these things. There are a lot of tools out there to do these things. System monitor that uses a notification engine designed to monitor and track down hidden activity on a desktop, server, or a personal PDA or a cell phone. Lots of tools, and I've asked you to install one tool, I think 10.4, on these things to look at what some of these things do. Some of them are free. Some of them are free for certain parts, for a certain number of sensors. As you look at these things, what tools are you going to use? And there are a number of open source ones. Protocol Analyzer, Sniffer, look at the traffic, captures the packets, decodes and analyzes it. Decode each packet sniffer. The display may look a little bit different because the packet sniffers themselves actually do the decodes. So they're going to look different. And if you watch the videos, the Laura Chappell videos, she sometimes uses a different protocol analyzer, so the decodes look a little bit different on the different ones of those things. So what do we want to do with this thing? Privilege, auditing. Why do we want to audit? I know you don't want to start over. Huh? Who's doing what's been accessed? Have we got it set up correctly? Permissions audit, access audit. Did we set it up the way that we thought we did? And then are we getting the results that we think we should get from these things? Information lifecycle management, how long are we going to keep documents? And when you get rid of paper documents, shred them, burn them. Don't put them out there for the dumpster divers because they're available. Used to have a guy who worked over at Staples. He said they're always going through their dumpsters. People are always going through the dumpster. And they may be looking for other stuff, but if they threw out network-related information, it would be available. Have a shredder. Has everybody got a shredder? Fireplace? Yeah, that works too. Except that paper gets in the way. I mean, the smooth paper doesn't form as clean an ash. And I do that sometimes too, but yeah. You need to get rid of it some way. Don't set it out on the curb. They had that commercial a few years ago where people were just going through the bank statements or somebody. Logs and logging is a big deal. Well, what goes on in the logs? How do you check the logs? Are there questions?